very nasty man, very conniving, and so much so Shakespeare wrote a play about him of the title Richard III. So we see here he didn't rule for very long, 1483 to 1485, so all of like 2 years. So let's see how his reign panned out. So Richard III lived from the 2nd of October 1452 to the 22nd of August 1485, and he reigned from the 26th of June 1483 to the 22nd of August 1485. I have a sneaky suspicion that he was killed. So Richard III became king when his brother's sons, Edward V and Richard, were declared illegitimate. History has blamed him for their murders, although there is no evidence of what actually happened to the boys. They just disappeared. Richard's reign was cut short when Henry Tudor burst onto the scene, restarting the Wars of the Roses at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Richard's troops were defeated and he died. Though our suspicions were correct, he was killed and Henry Tudor became king. So, Richard III was the youngest son of Richard, Duke of York, and still only a boy of 8 when his elder brother became Edward IV. He loved his big brother, and when he grew older, fought bravely and loyally in the Wars of the Roses, unlike his brother George, who kept switching sides. Richard married Anne Neville, the widow of Henry VI's only son, and the daughter of the rebellious Earl of Warwick. This marriage really annoyed his brother George, who had married Anne's sister Isabel, and thought that by doing so he'd inherit all of Warwick's fortune. Now it was going to be a split between him and Richard, and George wasn't happy. It was this argument that led people to suspect that Richard helped execute George by drowning him in a barrel of wine. I think we talked and saw a little bit about that in the previous Kings and Queens. Then Edward IV died suddenly, and his young son Edward became king. Richard was named Lord Protector of the realm because 12-year-old Edward was really too young to reign. But then people started whispering that Edward IV and his queen Elizabeth Woodville weren't properly married, and that meant Edward V wasn't really a king at all, just an ordinary little boy. It also meant that Richard ought to be king, and he lost no time in taking up the crown, and Richard was crowned on the 6th of July 1483. Anne and Richard only had one child, also called Edward, and the young boy died less than a year after his parents' coronation. Anne followed her son to the grave soon after, leaving Richard all alone. How horrible. Poor Richard. You kind of feel sorry for him. A few months later, Henry Tudor, the new star of the House of Lancaster, returned to England with one aim: to take Richard's throne. At the Battle of Bosworth, the king suffered a huge betrayal when 7,000 men all defected to Henry. Richard fought bravely, battling on even when his horse had run off without him. But eventually he was killed by Henry's men. The Wars of the Roses were finally at an end. Isn't there a quote from Shakespeare that goes, my horse, my kingdom for a horse"? Is that right? Forgive me, I'm not a Shakespeare enthusiast, but you kind of hear these things being said and wonder where they're from. So I apologise if it isn't that, but it's just something that came to my head. So, yes, bless him. He was killed in the battle because people deserted him. The Tudors then made sure that everybody remembered Richard as evil. They deformed his figure in portraits and threw away his body. It wasn't found again until 2012 when it was uncovered in a car park in Leicester. What? I didn't even know that. How would they know? So, I understand now. We all think Richard III was evil, but it was just Tudor propaganda. Oh, I'm gonna have to look this up. So they found his body in a car park in Leicester. If we have time, I'm gonna try and go onto the web and find some information out about that. Let's do it. Let's see if my internet will behave. Okay. Face the facts. Richard had a curved spine, which meant that one of his shoulders was a bit higher than the other. Right, okay, so there's actual fact to the hunchback propaganda thing. The Tudors who came after him did their best to make out that he was monstrous, accusing him of murdering his nephews and even altering paintings to make him look deformed. William Shakespeare wrote a play about Richard in which he made the king out to be an evil, hunchbacked monster. But then, who was on the throne when Shakespeare was writing? A Tudor, of course. So, it seems there's a lot of Tudor propaganda going on to make out that Richard was a bad person. But, I mean, you reap what you sow, right? If you're going to, kidnap these two young boys and lock them up, that's kind of cruel, but so were the days back then. Kingly cruelty. History has usually blamed Richard for the murder of his nephews, the princes in the Tower, but actually there's no proof that it was their uncle who did the wicked deed. Some historians say that while Richard was indeed responsible for putting the boys in the Tower, he had no plans to kill them. It was his usurper, Henry Tudor, who actually ordered the murders and then placed the blame on Richard. That would make sense. Because if Richard put them there, and they lived and, survived, there were probably records of them, people looking after them, right? But how else to make somebody appear monstrous? Is to murder somebody, erase all the evidence of you looking after them, and then say that, you did it. Very clever. And very horrible, actually, yes. Awkward end. Richard was the last English king to die in battle. Oh, that's interesting, actually. His successor, Henry Tudor, wasn't about to give his enemy a royal funeral, or a funeral of any kind. He had Richard's body stripped of his armour, put on an old horse, and sent off to Leicester, where it was buried without any fuss. Years later, during a dissolution of the monasteries, the tomb was broken into. His bones were eventually found again under a car park in Leicester in 2012. Well, my opinion has changed massively about poor old King Richard III. It seems like the Tudors really got their hands into his strong. His first rebellion failed and he ended up creeping back to his brother with his tail between his legs. One rebellion can be forgiven, right? But two. George went too far and, according to rumour, found himself face down in a barrel of wine. A sticky end, indeed. Then what happens? In 1483, Richard III succeeds to the throne. We've got a daily monarch thing here. The young Edward V and his brother Richard are moved to the Tower of London by their uncle, who was then succeeded to the throne as Richard III. And then in 1483, the princes in the tower are seen for the last time. And we read about Edward V last time, so we won't read him again. In 1485, we have the Battle of Bosworth. You can see this little picture here of people celebrating. Henry Tudor defeats Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth. Could this be the rise of the House of Tudor? We know it is. And in 1485, Richard dies. So there are a few people here who we need to take a look at. I'm just going to be systematically going through them and reading out the ones we haven't looked at yet. We just looked at Anne Neville because she marries Richard III in 1472. Let's look at Cecily Neville, who was born in 1415 and died in 1495. She was the Duchess of York, and she was married to Richard, Duke of York, and she was determined, beautiful and smart. Her son became Edward IV, and Cecily was horrified to discover that he'd married a Lancastrian widow instead of the princess she had in mind. After her son's death, she had his children declared illegitimate, and so secured the throne for her other son Richard. I think we remember a little bit about her last time. Already looked at Edward V, so we won't click on him. Richard of Shrewsbury we looked at because he is the other brother of the princess in the tower. Edward Plantation. So Edward Plantagenet was the Earl of Warwick. He was born in 1475 and died in 1499. He was the son of George, Duke of Clarence, and the brother of Edward IV and Richard III. He was the cousin of Edward V, the prince in the tower who never made it to the throne. He was the last of the Plantagenets and the last in the legitimate line from Henry II. But he also found himself in the Tower of London, like his cousin. This time at the request of Henry VII. Henry VII saw Edward's claim to the throne as a potential threat, and with the emergence of various other pretenders to the crown, Henry felt more and more anxious to secure his position as king. Eventually, Henry had Edward executed for plotting to escape the tower and for conspiring with the infamous pretender Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be the lost prince, brother of Edward V. I remember we looked at him last time. It gets so confusing. I don't know if you agree. Who's cousin and brother and sister and mother? It all gets quite confusing. Margaret Plantagenet, later Margaret Pole, who was the Countess of Salisbury, born in 1473 and died in 1541, and she was the daughter of George, Duke of Clarence, brother of Edward IV and Richard III, and sister of Edward Plantagenet. When he became king, Henry VII married Margaret's cousin Elizabeth. Henry kept his friends close, but his potential enemies Like so many people who fell out of favour with Henry, it wasn't long until she found her neck on the line. Oh my goodness. However, she didn't submit easily, and when she refused to put her head on the block, she was forced down. As she struggled, the inexperienced executioner's first blow made a gash in her shoulder rather than her neck. Oh my god, that's horrible. Oh my god, it gets worse. 10 additional blows were required to complete the execution. Okay, we're gonna just leave it there. That's totally gruesome. Oh my goodness, poor Margaret. So let's move on to John Delapole, who was the Earl of Lincoln, 1463 to 1487. So John Delapole was the nephew of King Edward IV and his successor Richard III. After the death of Richard's son Edward, he was declared heir presumptive to the crown. After Richard's defeat at the Battle of Bosworth on the 22nd of August 1485 by Henry VII, John was reconciled with the new king, but this was short-lived. He soon began plotting a rebellion fronted by a man named Lambert Simnel, who bore a striking resemblance to Edward, Earl of Warwick. While the real Edward remained imprisoned in the Tower of London, John promoted his own Edward as the true Yorkist heir. With Simnel at the helm, John built an army of Yorkist supporters, and they managed to secure a small victory over a Lancastrian force at Branham Moor. However, the tables were turned at the Battle of Stoke Field on the 16th of June 1487, and the Yorkist army was conclusively defeated, and John was killed in the battle. Nice try, but you didn't win. So now we just have this Richard to look at. Richard, Duke of York, Lord Protector of the Realm. This isn't our Richard, is it? No, because he died earlier than that. Anyway, Richard was one of the wealthiest men of his time, and in medieval England, this made him one of the most important. When Henry VI became ill, Richard was appointed Lord Protector of the Realm. However, his idea of protection went a bit further than just looking after the king. He decided his family would do a better job of ruling, and so began the Wars of the Roses. I'm very confused as to what Richard this is. I apologise, guys. We've looked at Edward IV, we've looked at George Plantagenet, and next we move on to Henry VII. So let's quickly scroll up and take the quiz to see how much we can remember. Question 1 of 5. Richard III was the younger brother of Edward IV. Is this true or false? I don't think it was his brother. Or maybe it was. I'm going to say true. Okay, that was a lucky yes. Correct. Richard was the brother of Edward IV and was crowned king when Edward IV's sons were declared illegitimate. Next question, 2 of 5. What was the name of Richard III's wife? Was it Anne Hyde, Elizabeth Woodville, Anne Neville, or Elizabeth Neville? I am going to go with one of the Nevilles. I'm going to go Anne. Correct. Richard III married Anne Neville. His brother George, Duke of Clarence, was married to his sister Isabel. So question 3 of 5. In which year were Richard III's nephews, the princes in the Tower, seen for the last time? This is a difficult one. I don't remember must be, let's systematically go through them. It's not 1500s because that's beyond our timeline. It's not 1350 because that's before our timeline. So it's got to be either 1483 or 1490. And 1490 is well after Richard died, so I'm going to go 1483. Correct. The princes were not seen after 1483. Question 4 or 5. Who was Richard III's opponent at the Battle of Bosworth? Was it Richard Neville, James Francis Edward Stuart, the Old Pretender, Henry Tudor, or Arthur, Duke of Brittany? It's Henry Tudor. Correct. Richard III faced Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth. Question 5 of 5. Where was Richard III buried in 1485? Was it Derby, York, Warwick, or Leicester? I'm going Leicester because they found him in a car park. Correct. Richard III was buried without ceremony in Leicester. And we got 5 crowns out of 5. So just quickly, I really want to know more about this finding his remains in a car park. So I'm quickly going to have a look online and see if I can find some information to read out for you. Okay, so I've managed to find a good source on Wikipedia. We're not going to read all of it because it is really, really long. So I'm just going to read out just some main bits here in the little introduction. So the remains were discovered within the site of the former Grey Friars Priory in Leicester, in England, in September 2012, following extensive anthropological and genetic testing. So the search began in August 2012 and it was initiated by the Looking for Richard project with the support of the Richard III Society. I didn't even know there was one. And the archaeological excavation was led by the University of Leicester Archaeological Services, working in partnership with Leicester County Council and City Council. And they actually found a human skeleton on the first day, which was lucky for them, belonging to a man in his 30s, showing signs of severe injuries. It had unusual physical features, notably sclerosis and a severe curvature of the back, and it showed that the man had probably been killed by a blow from a large bladed weapon, which actually cut off the back of his skull and exposed the brain. Whoa, this is really, really grim video, guys. I'm really sorry. Or by a sword thrust that penetrated all the way through the brain. I'm sorry for that visual imagery, but that is gruesome. What a way to go. And the age of the bones at death matched that of Richard when he was killed. And all the other things that were found were mostly consistent with the physical descriptions of the king. DNA allows this, and mitochondrial DNA extracted from the bones matched that of 2 matrilineal descendants, one 17th generation and one 19th generation of Richard's sister Anne of York. So taking all of those things into consideration, the University of Leicester announced on the 4th of February 2013 that it had concluded beyond reasonable doubt that the skeleton was that of Richard III. So what do you do with it now? So there was a lot of discussion, and they wanted to rebury them in Leicester Cathedral, but a controversy arose whether or not to use an alternative reburial site, York Minster or Westminster Abbey. And was held in the presence of the Archbishop of Canterbury. And here's a little picture here. Wouldn't that just be the weirdest thing? If the spirit of Richard III was to come back and witness his own funeral, you'd be like, whoa, peasants have changed. What have they got in their hands? And it would be such a culture shock, wouldn't it? But I'm glad that he was finally put to rest. And I'm so surprised that they actually found him. This is a picture of the skeleton here. So that is the history of Richard III. Let's go back to Kings and Queens now. So I really hope you have enjoyed this Kings and Queens. We will be moving on to Henry VII next. So thank you so much for listening, guys, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.